I have a few people attached to the different screen. So again, I think we're just a few minutes away, and then we should be able to start. I think fine. So, Nick, I think what it might be worth doing, because we have quite a few people who haven't joined us before, it might be worth you giving maybe a very short introduction to the Computer Art Society.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Sean. So, yes, it's very good to have this rather popular lecture and panel today. It's really good to have seen everyone sort of emerging from all sorts of places to join us. And the Computer Art Society, I should say, has actually been in existence for the best part of, well, since 1968, in fact, when it was founded, at a time, of course, when all this technology was in many ways in its very primitive form. And at that time, the potentials of the computer were seen by, a small group of quite far-sighted artists and technologists who realized that the sort of impact that this new digital form would have on art would be very far-reaching. And so since then, the Computer Art Society, which was developed out as a special interest group of the British Computer Society, has actually grown and prospered. It's been responsible for several quite influential exhibitions, but also bringing together a very varied group of artists, technologists and theorists. And what we've been doing latterly, especially during the COVID period, is moving our lectures that formerly happened at the British Computer Society in physical form. We've moved these online. And Sean in particular, a very big vote of thanks to you, Sean, for actually making this possible by hosting us on Zoom. So tonight we are joined by a panel that comprises Alex May, Fabrizio, Poltronieri, and Irini Papadimitriou, who are all joining us to discuss the impact of NFTs. Now, I could launch into my initial very, very short presentation, if you like, Sean, or do you want to let some more people join in?
Yes, I've got a few more coming in.
Okay, I'll hang fire.
So I think until I'm happy that we've got as many people as possible in the various streams, it might be worth just maybe saying a little bit about Computer Art Society, some of the other things we've done.
Yes, certainly. So really the very first sort of iteration of the Computer Art Society formed by a triumvirate of John Lansdowne, who was an architect who was the first to bring computers into architectural practice in the UK, Alan Sutcliffe, a software engineer and technologist who was also very much a pioneer of digital music, and George Mallon, who's developed cybernetics in conjunction with Gordon Pask, and was the three together met at a, well, the idea was posited first in 1968 to bring together a society that looked at computer arts in the plural, not merely the visual, but also the auditory, the performative, really sort of understanding the potentials of the computer in these different areas. And that sort of initial inspiration that the digital would actually encompass impacts in forms that perhaps were quite rudimentary back in the 1960s, that sort of proved to be very prophetic. And in fact, one of the things I will touch on today is actually a book from 1971. So that's the 50-year anniversary of this particular book, Computer Graphics, Computer Art by Herbert Franke. And he predicts in that book not only the emergence of networked home terminals, video terminals as he conceived them back then, but he sort of foresaw their impact on working, on sort of general life, and also as a conduit for digital art into people's homes. And that, I think, is something that really is sort of particular relevance today as we contemplate NFTs and their impacts. So, right, Sean, are we ready to...
I think we're about right, yeah. So for those on YouTube, sorry if you had the wrong YouTube link. It looked like I couldn't link this Zoom stream through to the one that I publicized, but hopefully you went to the homepage and have found, okay, I guess by definition, you have gone to the homepage and found this YouTube link. For those on Zoom, hopefully everybody who booked Zoom has a place. We actually have, what we have at the moment, 54 on Zoom and 80 or 90 on YouTube. So if people want to come over to the Zoom at some point, there are a few places available. I'll keep an eye on that. Otherwise, I think it's probably a good idea if we were to start. Now, the session we advertised here is NFTs, smoke and mirrors, or sort of exciting technology for the artists. And of course, the reality is, if you know a little bit about NFTs, or even a lot, it's probably both. I think we're looking at a technology which has been overhyped and has been maybe abused in some ways, but within that technology, I certainly see some potentially very exciting opportunities for artists. And really what we're looking to do today is to begin a conversation within the Computer Art Society about those things. So what are the exciting things about NFTs? What are potentially the less exciting or damaging thing about NFTs? And what I wonder is that this might be the first of a series of sessions. There's clearly, from the numbers of people who've been attracted, there's a great deal of interest in this technology. And quite rightly, I think it is potentially very exciting and certainly interesting technology. However, most of us, artists or otherwise, are probably still coming to grips with what it might offer. So the panel today includes people who are experimenting with it as artists, but also have views about the technology as curators, maybe collectors, or people who are interested in the broader issues surrounding its use and digital arts. So what we will do is we will start with an introduction from Fabrizio Poltronieri. We'll then move on to Alex May. I will then talk about my project, and then we'll move on to Irini, her work as a curator. And then we'll open it up for a bit of a discussion between the panelists, but we'd welcome people to raise questions and potentially get involved in the discussion. I'll try and keep it orderly, and I do try to make sure that these sessions don't go on much more than 1 hour, because I find 1 hour is probably enough attention for most people's attention span. If by the end of it, we feel we've only made scratch the surface, I'm sure we will, and we want to continue the conversation, what we will do is we'll probably organise a follow-up session in a week or two to maybe examine some specific issues. I will actually conclude by talking about a couple of initiatives that we're looking to do within the Computer Art Society that might help solve some of the problems that we'll identify within the use of NFT and maybe the promotion of work by digital artists. So while I sit here staring at lots of streams and numbers and clicking buttons, I will hand over first of all to Fabrizio, who will give a sort of 5-minute introduction to himself, his interest in NFT, and maybe you might want to raise a few questions for us to discuss later. Over to you, Fabrizio.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. First of all, it's very good to see so many friends attending this session, including some of my students and ex-students. That's really great. I would also like to thank you, Sean. Thank you, Nick, and thanks, CAS, for organizing that and for having me this evening. I will try to share my screen. Let me see. Yep, cool. Can you see? Okay, so I prepare a very simple slide presentation that with some image that I'm going to show you, because what I thought that it would be beneficial to use my time to provide a very brief historical background about NFTs and all of this hype, because my impression is that still many people believe that first, this concept was created overnight, the concept of NFTs and all this crypto stuff, especially after Beeple, this guy here, or Mike Winkelmann, what is his name, sold his now very famous piece, Every Day is the First 5,000 Days, for $6.9 million in a Christie's auction. Well, it makes it the third most expensive artwork, if we can say that, made by a living artist. This is the artwork. I think that most of people have already seen that. Something that is, I think that also it's very important to highlight is the fact that Beeple was already a but a famous and very active person on the digital design communities on the internet, as he has been making Creative Commons daily images at least since 2007 for almost 15 years. And he also collaborated with many famous artists such as Flying Lotus, One Direction, and Nicki Minaj. So he was not by any means a complete stranger. This is also something that I think many people still think, that he just appeared from nowhere. One question, I prepared some questions that I think would be useful for our debate after the presentations is this art? So I really not here to judge that at this point, but I think that this is, the one of the elephants in the room, especially for the community of computer artists or digital artists. Well, also something that is important is that this whole crypto art movement has been out there for years now. It's, again, not something that appeared last year. At least it exists at least since 2014, when the first experiments in this field happened, with the creation of other layers in the Bitcoin's blockchain. I think also, just a side note, of course, this is not a technical session, but I think that it's important to say a couple of things about blockchain. Basically, a blockchain is a growing list of records, called blocks, this is the reason for the name, that are linked using cryptography. So each block contains a cryptographic hash of the previous block, that is a timestamp, and a transaction data. So it's a very simple log. By design, and it is what it makes the concept of blockchain interesting, is the fact that the blockchain is resistant to modification of its data. So this is because once you record, the data in any given block cannot be altered. So we cannot change what was recorded there. So for use as a distributed ledger, that is what is a blockchain is. A blockchain is typically managed by a peer-to-peer network collectively. And it makes a blockchain very, very safe. And another question that I want to pose is how artists, especially, again, computer artists, can use this powerful infrastructure. And talking about infrastructure, the infrastructure that made NFTs possible appeared in 2015. So 6 years ago, when the concept, a very important concept, the concept of smart contracts was implemented in the version 1.2 of Ethereum. That is a cryptocurrency, and most of the websites selling or dealing with NFTs use Ethereum. So again, a smart contract is basically a very small computer program or a transaction protocol which is intended to automatically execute, control, or document legally relevant events and actions according to the terms of a contract or an agreement. This is the reason for the name. So the main objective of smart contracts are the reduction of needing trusted intermediators. So we don't need anyone outside the blockchain, arbitrations, and enforcement costs. And it also reduces the risk of malicious and accidental exceptions. So at last, in theory, it's very, very safe. And this is one of the foundations of NFTs. Well, so 2 years after that, in 2017, we saw the first projects using concepts of gamification to foment the act of collecting digital tokens. Projects such as CryptoPunks, and this is this screen that I'm sharing. It's very, very famous. If you visit OpenSea, probably you have seen that. So it's a crypto art that has been around since 2017. Also, Mooncat Rescue. Probably if you visit one of these websites, you have already seen that as well. And Crypto Kitties. You know, so all of these so-called pieces of art are what it's in the NFT terminology called collectibles. So people collect them. And then more related to what I think most of people consider art, in July last year, this artist, Trevor Jones, sold an NFT of this work here called Picasso's Bull for this huge amount of money. And a very interesting fact is that this artwork was bought by an internet institution called the Museum of Crypto Art, which is probably a corporative influencer. And this is also one of the problems that I see in all of this NFT and crypto art boom. If we also analyze the piece that Grimes sold for, I think, $5 million dollars, also to someone that we don't know, because this is also one of the features of blockchain. I have, like, you know, a huge suspicion that who bought that was her husband, Elon Musk. So I just want to address very briefly in all of this history something that most of people say, that is the environmental impact of NFTs and the whole blockchain ecosystem. Because of course, this is a crypto, it's based on the concept of cryptocurrency that is based somehow in the whole concept of currency. So most of the cryptocurrencies are based on the concept of scarcity, but of course it's a very artificial scarcity, because nothing prevents people to just, you know, to create with their computers, after publishing a white paper, cryptocurrencies. The whole point is who is going to put money on that. So one of the ways to make sure that the cryptocurrency has some real value is to what is called the mining process that is used, for example, by Bitcoin and also by Ethereum. So the way that they use to validate new coins, it's called proof of work. So basically very hard mathematical equations that computers need to solve in order to validate a new coin on the blockchain. The thing is, this proof of work networks incentivize miners, people using their computers and GPUs to mine cryptocurrencies, to produce new blocks with a block reward. So when you produce a new block, you get another block. And this is funded by inflation. One of the problems is that also, as it is funded by inflation, taxing all holders of the tokens to execute transactions on the network increase the value, increase the artificial scarcity. So long as the tokens appreciate rapidly in value, went up, that inflation-based tax is ignored by the holders, and this may no longer be true if appreciation stops. So I would like to just to conclude, talk about this website called Rick et Nunc. It's a Brazilian platform that has been growing, and it was adopted by the community of creative coders, and it uses Tezos, another cryptocurrency that is a cryptocurrency that uses proof of stake and not proof of work as Bitcoin and Ethereum. What is a proof of stake? Well, unlike a proof of work consensus system like Ethereum or Bitcoin, a proof of stake network like Tezos does not depend on the cost of the electricity it burns to prevent potential attackers. So instead, it depends on direct economic incentives, whether through a carrot, like a block reward, or via a stick. Slashing is the term that stakeholders post bonds with, can be sized if they misbehave. So a proof of stake network has no lower bound on the amount of energy it needs to expand. So indeed, as computer technology improves, we can expect the power required to drop. So if you Google the difference between, for example, Tezos and Ethereum, it uses like a fraction of the energy required to coin or to mint or to register informations or transactions on the network. So yeah, as Sean said, just to conclude, this was a very, very brief introduction. I try to make it very simple and didactic to show that this is something that has been happening for some time now. I have been experimenting with blockchains also and NFTs for a while. I can talk a little bit more about that later. And I think that, you know, the question for us is how we can take advantage of this infrastructure and these technologies, you know, either to promote computer art or to promote new artists. And I think that it would be very disillusional and also a little bit crazy to just imagine it that everyone will be a millionaire overnight selling NFTs. Well, this is what I had to say in my 5 minutes. That probably I talked more than 5 minutes. Infrastructure. Thank you very much, Sean.
Okay, thank you, Fabrizio. So I think already the first speaker has raised probably some issues that some of the other attendees and some of the other speakers will discuss, to do with what is the blockchain, what are these tokens,
this gorgeous spot I just found by our house. It's a lake,
have somebody
like a
else
full
in here.
lake. We'll definitely be jumping off this rock all summer long. You know what I mean? If you're expecting a lake, then you know how I feel.
Oh, I can't see anybody else. Okay, I can see somebody else who's unmuted. Sorry about that. So we have a number of issues already emerging. I think the next speaker, I would like to hand over to Alex May to maybe talk a little bit about his take on this technology and the work that he's doing.
Thank you, Sean. And yep, very good to see everyone here. Fabrizio, can you stop sharing your screen and then I can share mine? Lovely tar.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's all right. Okay, so yeah, I sort of wanted to talk a little bit about my kind of interest in this area, because it's obviously this has come to the fore in terms of sort of, you know, people taking notice of this thing. And as we've seen, I mean, this whole ecosystem has been growing for years. And as you can probably tell by the complexity that already exists, this has been, I mean, it's bewildering how many projects there are involved with this whole system. But my particular take, and I've done talks on this with CAS before, is predominantly about digital preservation, especially for artworks. So I've done, in fact, the last talk that I did for CAS was, I think it was the beginning of the last series of talks about my artwork, A Mirror for Remembering, which was all about digital preservation, working with museums and scanning digital assets or scanning real world assets and then turning them into digital assets for distribution and sharing online, which obviously feeds directly into the world of NFTs. And because with blockchains, we can have a practical and trusted way to authenticate and trade unique digital tokens. You're not dealing about the actual objects. You can trade physical objects. I mean, Damien Hirst has done a lot of work in this area with trading artworks, physical artworks that he's made, but they're traded as digital tokens. There's, as you can again probably guess, there's so much technology involved in this, but one of the sort of salient things I think that needs to be mentioned is the artworks themselves, whether they're JPEG images or movies or whatever, they're not actually stored themselves on the blockchain. You can't actually store that much data in the blockchain. The blockchain is more about the tokens, who owns them, and the smart contracts for dealing with the transmission and implementation of those tokens. So, I mean, artists have experimented with this, but generally they're just sort of pointing to the artworks, which is something is a big problem for digital preservation. As Fabrizio already mentioned a bit about smart contracts, they're really fascinating in terms of democratizing the sale of artworks for artists. If I sell an artwork for an NFT artwork, I can say for the next person to sell it, I want 10% of that sale, and it will happen. I don't have to trust anyone. If I want to say give 50% to a charity every time it's sold, I can put that into the smart contract and it will get enforced, because you cannot transfer the token without operating the smart contract. That's kind of one of the immutable things in this system. So NFTs are an interesting area because they're and especially this sort of rush to adopt them, because they're actually operating on this ecosystem of very centralized systems, things like Super Rare and Rareable and all of these places where you go to create your NFTs, where you go to trade NFTs and buy NFTs. They're actually centralized places. The data then gets put onto the blockchain. That is decentralized, but basically there's these very closed systems, and that for me is a big issue in terms of digital preservation, because if sites go down, then all of that information disappears. And the same thing with NFT data. So if I've got a data file, which is the artwork, and somebody trades the token and they want to access the artwork, they have to download it still. It's still like transferring a file. But if that file is no longer available on the internet, it's gone. And there's already a growing number of NFT artworks which are disappearing. And if you've bought one and the file no longer exists, your money is gone, because you cannot sell that, or you probably could try to sell it to somebody, but it would be a fairly fraudulent thing, because the actual asset itself no longer exists. So I see that as quite an issue in terms of trust of the system, and a fundamental issue with the system. I mean, I think it's solvable, but I think it's a lot of people are buying and making and selling these things without being aware of this issue. There's this thing called IPFS, which is the Interplanetary File System, which is a way of sharing data and making things available, which a lot of people sort of think is a kind of will solve this issue. But you still have to have the data live somewhere on the network for it to operate. Again, it's another big discussion. So, I mean, I think that the NFT thing represents the disruption of the traditional art market, which is fascinating to watch, and as everything sort of shifts so quickly and unravels, and Christie's is trying to get in on it, and sort of. It's just sort of big movement, but I think it's part of the cryptocurrency's wider disruption of the global economy, for good and possibly a little bit ill, but mostly good, I think. So just if I thought, because this thing is so internet based, I'd just do the rest of my slides as memes, basically. So I think that there is a massive problem with artists who just posting stuff up on the internet for free and putting it onto websites like Instagram, but like these marketplaces as well, which actually don't show the work that well, and they're just kind of like these endless little boxes. But at least with an NFT, you stand a chance of sort of making some money, maybe in the short term, but I think you'll have bigger impacts longer term as well. It's interesting to look at the music industry and how the music industry has devalued music. And actually, it wasn't home recording, if you remember that campaign back in the whenever it was, of sort of home piracy, copying music. It was the recording itself kind of killed the music industry, because once you commodify an artistic thing and you reduce the value of the intrinsic object, and you're making money off kind of bulk sales and streaming and things, we can't have this happen to the art market. It's going that way with Instagram and things, because you're just posting it up and the popular things bubble to the top and everything else is just kind of under the surface. So I actually see NFTs as a way of disrupting this outcome for digital art. And modern problems require modern solutions. It's so true. I think right this second, obviously, there's the big focus is on money, and why not? I mean, it's artists need ways to get paid. Why should they, be beholden to gatekeepers that have traditionally sort of chosen who gets paid and who doesn't? Let's have a gold rush. Let's see what happens. I mean, yes, people are going to invest and speculate wildly, and those people will lose money. But I think that an artist who puts up an NFT artwork for sale doesn't really have much to lose. You have to pay a bit of gas fees, but people are selling them for $1,000 here or more. It's worth a punt. And I think the more people that kind of get used to using all this technology and stuff, longer term we will have a sustainable ecosystem. And obviously, I mean, a lot of the conversations that I've been reading regarding the blockchain quickly get sort of sidetracked, I think, into conversations about climate change and the environmental impact. And it's very tricky to respond in a way that isn't immediately kind of shut down, because it's hard to sort of tread the line between sort of techno utopia to utopia and sort of it's all going to be fine and technology will solve everything, and we haven't got long with climate change and everything's bad. One of the interesting things that I just want to point out on this subject is that for the first time we can actually see or have an idea about the electricity usage of a thing. Like, basically what they've done on the back of an envelope is you can see how many transactions are going on. You can make a back of the envelope guess about how much electricity that uses, and you can come up with a big scary looking number. Try doing that with the traditional money markets or gold mining, or mining for the materials for all the electronic devices that we enjoy. You will get nowhere because that data is not available. So I think, and also it only uses electricity. Electricity can be generated cleanly. It can be, unlike many other, mining and things, it's inherently destructive on a big sort of ecosystem. So I think it needs more kind of understanding and research and sort of balance. I might be slightly techno utopia on that thing. But anyway, so that's kind of the sort of areas that I'm kind of looking into, and we'll be looking into sort of a bit longer term. So okay, thanks, Sean.
Great, thanks, Alex. Just making sure. So I'm going to say a little bit next. You stop your screen sharing, that's great. These first three talks are really from practitioners, and I'm the third practitioner here. And then we do have two additional introductions from Nick and Irini. I have to be honest, Nick should have been first, but I got a bit flustered with all the activity going on the stream. So he's going to be after or at the end, do a bit of a sum up. So I thought it might be worth me sharing my experience of engaging with NFT as an artist. Now, probably like a number of people here, I was aware of the technology. Probably last year it came to my awareness, the idea that you could share an original, or at least something representing an original of an artwork online, and that could be bought and sold using cryptocurrency, and it would be stored within the blockchain, and anyone who looked at the blockchain could see that you, or at least your wallet, own that cryptocurrency or that crypto artwork, and you could buy and sell them and so on. I thought this was interesting, and I thought it was something that I could engage with, but I really wanted to do it from a perspective of integrating it into my creative practice. Now, I'm sort of quite lucky in this respect, in that while I do occasionally sell hard copies of my artwork, some physical things, prints and so on, my practice is really based around the idea of creating systems, and these systems generate the artwork or the thing that people can buy and sell. If I was to say what my art is, my artwork is the system, and in a sort of Solowit-like way, the system helps me produce the artwork or the thing that other people might see as the artwork. So I was quite used to the idea that the thing that was fairly intangible, and it struck me therefore that I might be able to engage with this idea of NFT from a perspective of maybe making some of the things that are intangible slightly more tangible than they are. So what I'm going to share with you, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to take you through how this informed the creation or the enhancement of an artwork I'd already produced, but I'd now re-engineered, if you like, to take into account the potential of NFTs. So I'm going to just share my screen. Hopefully you will get my web browser. That will become visible. So I decided that I was going to engage with NFTs by doing something involving this artwork here, a piece that I call 27. 27 is a collection of multiple parts that are combined to form multiple wholes. Some of these wholes are what I regard as acceptable combinations. Other combinations are not. So I define a set of rules, first of all, to define the individual parts, things you see here, and then to define the acceptable combination of parts. So in this case, the row of 3 here, row of 3, and I can display these parts on black, white, or grey backgrounds. Now, previously, when I exhibited the work, I produced 27 prints, and these prints were distributed across multiple locations around my home city of Leicester. And these combinations were notionally connected to each other by all being part of the system. So in this location, there were 9 prints, and then there were another 6 locations, all having 3 prints each. And people could look at the prints as individual pieces. They could maybe look closer and realize they're made of combinations of parts. Or if they were aware of the larger set, the full system, they could visit every location, and they would hopefully have a sense of the whole, what I was defining as a whole, and how it is composed of multiple parts, which themselves are composed of multiple parts, and so on. So this artwork, 27, like I say, was exhibited in 2018 and was designed to be a fairly intangible thing. Is the artwork the individual print, or do you have to have all of them in order for it to be the artwork? The artworks themselves often share components. So this idea of parts and wholes, which is of interest to me, seemed to work quite well with this piece. So I had in mind that there might be a potential sort of digital layer to this. And what I did was I produced a version of this artwork that is completely free to download and construct. So you can go to my website and download information about constructing this website, the framing, the printing paper, inks that you should use. And you can then take these, download all the constituent parts, and full resolution. These all vector resolution. And then if you wanted to, you could make a full copy of that artwork. That would be, if you followed the rules properly, there are acceptable combinations and instructions here, would be largely indistinguishable from the so-called original. However, this is not purely an act of generosity on my part. I'm very happy for you to download and construct this artwork. But in order for you to regard this artwork as an original, you have to buy a token. And these little tokens are available on a website called OpenSea. And when you buy a token, you authenticate a combination of prints. So really what I did here was I thought, well, I can abstract out the idea of ownership or originality into one of these online tokens. And if you go and buy an online token, so long as you've made a copy of my artwork according to the rules, you will then have an original. If you sell that token to somebody else, if they haven't got the artworks, all they have is a token. If they have the prints, the artworks, it becomes an original. So for me, I am seeing the opportunity of NFTs, these small tokens that you sell, as a way of separating, or rather more giving you the opportunity to own the system, to own a part of the system and authenticate quite an abstract artwork. So how does that work? Well, like I say, you can download the instructions for making the artwork, and then you can go to a website here called OpenSea, which is being used by a lot of people for their experiments. And you can then buy one of these tokens. Now, I really don't know what these tokens are worth, and I don't know if people do want to buy them. So I've come up with a pricing model that values them extremely, some of them very low, that I think is £50 or something, and some of them very high, so £2,000. I'm not saying at the moment which one you should, if anyone is going to, they should buy. And I'm not claiming that those tokens have some sort of high tradable value. But what I am asking people to think about is, how does the notion of ownership of a digital artwork change when I give away the work and I sell the authentication of that work? So you make a copy, if you buy a token, it's now an original. I think it's an interesting concept. It's different to some of the other things that I see online. I often see people selling tokens as collectibles, as Alex and Fabrizio have mentioned. And really what people are asking you to buy are these tokens. Really? The token will be a unique or limited thing, and the value will be in that you have the limited thing and someone else doesn't. So that is maybe my sort of contribution to this thought about how might this digital technology, NFT technology, change your practice. I'm looking at selling the parts that make my artworks. So if you own the part, you own all the artworks that contain that part. I don't know if it's going to be successful. I haven't promoted this widely and I haven't sold any. But really, it's a contribution that I want to make and start working with. And certainly over the next year, I see it being quite central to my practice. So mine was the third talk really by an artist looking at how these NFT tokens, these digital tokens, can be used in their work. I think what we're going to do now is maybe ask a curator, Irini, to talk a little bit about how she is engaging with this technology and what she finds interesting about it. So maybe over to you for a bit, Irini.
Thank you, Son. Great to be here and to with so many friends and familiar people in the same room. So I think it's, first of all, it's great that Fabrizio and Alex, to hear what Fabrizio and Alex had to say, because I had a lot of notes around that. So maybe I can just, without taking too much time, so we can have our conversation, I can just add a little bit to that. So I started, my background is in curating like digital art, and I started being interested in blockchain technology and exploring how artists were working with blockchain, like from my kind of previous position at the V&A, and in particular from 2014, which was part of a program that I was running there called Digital Futures with when I had an artist called Heidi Hinder to come in as a resident, and we developed a whole program exploring money, no object, it was called. So we were exploring these ideas around like cryptocurrencies, but also thinking about the finance kind of and bit and market kind of relation and art relations. So I've been following like the work of artists that we've some, like I'm sure most people are aware of, like right here, which who were doing like slightly different work from what we're seeing in like being promoted in the press with NFTs right now, and they probably had like a more with artists who had a more critical approach in terms of kind of thinking about like the potential of like blockchain, and but also relations of power, decentralization, thinking about equity as well. And I think most people in the room will be probably familiar with this book, Artists Rethinking the Blockchain, that Furtherfield published in 2017, I think, which is a great collection of essays and like writings from artists, but also, like the early adopters, let's say, of crypto as well, and experimenting with blockchain. And it was actually like a bit later with Future Everything that when I joined in 2018, that I started working on a project that I wanted to mention here, which kind of links in with these ideas of thinking the potential of blockchain, and that was Trickle Down, New Vertical Sovereignty by artist Helen Knowles. And you can find details on the futureeverything.org website about the project. And what Helen did was that she created a series of audiovisual kind of like works that were kind of connected and attached to the blockchain, to Ethereum blockchain. And she recorded a series of auctions in these works. Actually, one of the auctions was the CryptoKitty sale in New York in 2018, which reached like $140,000 back then. And CryptoKitties, as we know, is like some sort of like it's an NFT basically. And what I found, the reason why I wanted to mention this work, and I thought is really interesting, basically Helen Knowles is one of these artists who was kind of exploring blockchain in terms of thinking about labor, but also thinking about distribution of wealth. And the idea was that everyone who was involved in making the artwork happen, in terms of like workers or like software developers, the galleries, the art kind of assistants, etc., they would be assigned like smart wallets, so that every time that somebody goes and to see the work, they have to pay a coin, a pound coin, or like depending on the place where it is based, the local currency coin, so that this is the only way that for the work to come alive. And then the artwork automatically makes payments to people who have the smart contracts that are linked to the work. So she had created this kind of sort of community, which again kind of takes me back to kind of other like projects like Jonas Land, like Token, etc. So artists who have created like other ways of creating like shareholding, people who can have shareholding power and voting power over like what happens to their work. And this is what Helen has been doing with this as well. So one thing that I've been finding really interesting in terms of what happens with the NFTs is like this element of, how the setting where all these sales have happened. And Fabrizio mentioned the famous like Beeple artwork that sold for 69 million like recently. And of course, there was the CryptoKitty from 2018, but also there was a series of other events in terms of like the Banksy piece as well. And what I find interesting is that all of this happened in this kind of context of the auction, which is basically very much linked to a spectacle as well in the way that it has been happening. And And also, as Fabrizio said earlier, but also I think Alex was the idea of like, you know, who are these artists like that have been making the headlines and the news. So again, like I'm glad that you mentioned the Hiken Nung, because I was going to kind of talk about it as well. And actually, I don't know if you have seen that, like I think a few days ago, Matthew Plummer Fernandez, an artist who have been he has created work on Hiken Nung as well. He posted this kind of text that is encoded in this JPEG, which was minted like on Hiken Nung as well. So it's really interesting, his article talking from his perspective as an artist, and his kind of battling of like these kind of contradictory ideas of thinking about like opportunities for artists in terms of entering this world, but also thinking about environmental issues, etc. And kind of like, yeah, just to kind of cut it a bit shorter is just to say that for me, like what is really interesting going back to this auction idea is that what, of course, like for these markets, it's been like a new, for this auction house and this establishment, it has been like a new market and reaching new audiences. And it's interesting to kind of think like of what comes up when you search now for digital art, for example, on Google, because there is a lot of results around NFTs, for example. So it's really interesting to think that, you know, what people might think of like, you know, what digital art is, or, and it might be different to like what, you know, people maybe within the computer art society world might think, you know, might have as an idea of like what digital art could be in relation to, you know, what we have been seeing in terms of the big sales in NFTs, which again kind of remind me of the, you know, the collectibles, but like even the pre-digital collectibles in a way, and makes me wonder, you know, if this is something that, you know, might stay for much longer in terms of like prices, or if it is like inflated and then it kind of, you know, it will kind of pass slowly. So just to close, just wanted to and go back to the beginning, like an interest of, you know, work that comes out in this field is that going back to the people, when I'm hearing from events like these, it makes me think that, yeah, this is, it's very interesting. It's great to kind of, that this opens up new audiences for this world. It gives opportunities to artists as well, but actually in terms of kind of groundbreaking ideas and innovation, it's where I see it coming is actually from artists rather than from places like an establishments like Christie's, etc., who create, like enable events like this, or even actually the people who are invested behind these kind of platforms like Ethereum, etc. And because we all know that NFTs are mainly based on Ethereum blockchain. So for me, it's kind of, it makes sense that it has an inflated value, and also the people who have invested on these platforms, they obviously drive this publicity as well. So yeah, so I just wanted to close here, and maybe because I know I'm aware of time, and it'd be great to start maybe to go into the conversation now.
Thank you very much, Irini. So I think what we have now is Nick, who can maybe give us what might end up being an introduction to the open conversation piece, as well as maybe a little bit of a summing up of some of the things we talked about. So Nick, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Thank you very much to Fabrizio, to Alex, and to Irini for, I think, giving us these varying viewpoints. I think especially from the practical end, the sort of the developmental end of NFTs, and also how they can be deployed by artists in this way as well. And I think, you know, there are several issues that we could sort of return to in the conversation. I mean, firstly, I think is the potential for NFTs to be radically disruptive. A number of commentators, for instance, J.J. Charlesworth in Art Review, a recent article that he wrote called Why the Art World Loves to Hate NFT Art, actually makes the point that it gives voice in some ways to certain subcultures that don't otherwise get represented in the contemporary art world, that it sort of bypasses aspects of gatekeeping that the contemporary art world perhaps imposes on art, and just sort of goes straight to the jugular. Certainly the imagery used by Beeple and others is very much about well, kitsch, contemporary sort of imagery, and that also leads to a question, I think, for a lot of digital artists, especially those who've been working in the medium for a longer term, is, as Irini was saying just now, is to what extent does that represent what digital art in the broader sense actually is. So I think NFTs have in some ways displaced the things that we would want to, you know, sort of champion in our sort of particular area as being digital art. But on a broader scale, maybe it also helps to assault and break down some of the citadels of contemporary art and the gatekeepers of that sort of area as well. There's a sort of radical potential there. Also, Ruth Catlow, writing for the Art newspaper, obviously she's been referenced through Furtherfield and artists rethinking the blockchain. You know, she says, well, you know, she recognises some of the problematic aspects of the monetization of NFTs and what that brings, but also that might bring opportunities. And some of those opportunities would be to improve the way that profits are distributed to artists and resale royalties, and to make that sort of process much more transparent. And also that the sort of art that she's been championing through her time at Furtherfield, as she says, over 25 years of internet-based art, could actually be sort of facilitated by the way that NFTs work, and also that that could actually bring sort of ways to you know, enable artists to have a fairer exchange, especially given the sort of sums that are being sort of put forward for NFTs as well. Nonetheless, the art world is very able to monetize the immaterial. I think we saw that with Banksy's Morons being burned by the injective protocol. In fact, they bought the piece really to use in a stunt, and the stunt was, you know, to once they sort of paid a certain amount for the Banksy, then the destruction of it and the resulting NFT of the video of the destruction raised far more money, and that was partly, I think, as an illustration of the sort of transfer of value. The way that a material piece can be sort of not only destroyed, but its value somehow realized and transformed by being sort of processed through into an NFT. And then the corollary of that, perhaps, sort of stories surfacing now of some people having purchased via NFTs certain digital works, only to find that some said works have actually disappeared, not because the NFT itself has been destroyed, but rather because the thing that it references, the actual link to the work has been removed. That in fact, you know, speaking more in my role as a sort of historian of digital art, trying to understand what is the longevity of these forms, not so much in terms of the blockchain or the transactions, but rather the things that it references. Can this actually serve as a way of helping us preserve and, in fact, authenticate digital art, or is it merely going to be a, you know, it's merely a bookkeeping exercise, and the sort of actual things that we are trying to authenticate or preserve will still disappear? So, you know, there's a transient aspect to all of this, and I think that's why it's you know, so interesting to study it at this moment. So there's just a few thoughts there, a few things that I think have emerged, and let's see what comes out in the conversation to follow.
Okay, thank you. So we are running a little late, but I think we should maybe give ourselves half an hour for the conversation there. There's been a little bit of chat taking place at the in the chat box, but I wonder if maybe as panelists we might want to just talk a little bit about some of the issues that have been raised. Perhaps we might want to start first of all with this idea of value. Do these tokens have any value, and where is that value? Clearly they do have value to somebody because they're spending lots of money on them, but is there any real meaningful value in these?
I mean, they are a store of value. I mean they, well, you know, a token on the blockchain, you know, a Bitcoin has a store of value. I mean, the interesting thing with the NFT things is what is on the blockchain is not the entirety of the thing, and I think that's as I sort of alluded to, that's where the sort of the weakest link in this situation is. I mean, obviously the token can represent the value, can hold the value, can be traded for the value. But because it's linked to a real world thing, even if it's digital, it can lose it in an instant.
Yeah, if I can add something, I would like to say that I agree very much with what Alex said, that these technologies can be very disruptive and the artists can take advantage of these technologies, especially if we compare them with the real art market. Just the other day, I listened to a podcast where famous media arts galleries talked about why NFTs are bad and so forth and so on. But at the same time, when you enter the website of the gallery, one of the first things that you see is don't send us portfolios because we are not interested. So I think that, yeah, it can be a little bit naive, but I think that there is a real opportunity here. And talking about this question, because I made this introduction to link to this actual question, I think that this is a positive side. There are things that are really change or have the potential to change. But the way I see many of the things involved in cryptocurrency and in NFTs and so forth and so on, including all this environmental impact, what is of course important, I see that many of these questions, they are not really new, so the situation of does cryptocurrency have value, or is this like a real piece of art? If we take a step back and look to the history of how these concepts were created, all of these questions were already there. So I think that this is also important to give some context to this discussion, because, as I said, there are many, many new opportunities, but I think that many people are concerned with things that, are not new. As Alex said, and I agree again with him about the environmental impact, I think that this is one of the central questions. But I always like to think, if you visit an art fair, an art market in Hong Kong, in Shanghai, in Singapore, in Brazil, whatever, nobody talks about the huge environmental impact, involved in sending all these artworks and then bringing them back and so forth and so on. So again, this is a very important subject, but it's part of our society, and again, it's not new. So I think that it's important. This is the way I see many things. It's important to have in perspective that these are real problems, but these are also real problems in the society as a whole. It's not like something that NFTs or cryptocurrencies invented. And maybe, we can think about these problems, but also think about the new problems and the new challenge that this scenario brings to us.
Yeah. If I can just step in response, there's a question. I'm looking at the feed here from Alex Buchan, who says it seems the value for crypto art and NFTs comes from the social media presence and how many followers the digital artist has, because of how many orientated the motivation behind purchasing NFTs is. So he framed that as being incredibly problematic towards our social media culture, as well as adding further value to dominative platforms such as Instagram. But I think there's a couple of points there worth pulling out. Firstly, value can be seen in a number of different senses, and in some ways, the sort of value attached to having that presence in the first place, and the ability to boost, I think, some of what not only one's presence but also one's the sort of price one can put on some of these works is actually very directly related to that sort of footprint. But secondly, also that our NFTs, in a way, not so much the underlying technology, but the sort of manifestation of them, is that more linked to the social media culture itself? I mean, are we looking perhaps at the, if we're addressing criticism to it, are we criticizing the wrong part of it? Is it actually the sort of networked identity and the nature of that sort of type of celebrity that attaches to sort of the social media account? Is that actually the thing that we're trying to pin down here rather than the NFT itself?
I just wanted to add to this, because one thing that comes to my mind always, obviously, is this idea of like what you buy with NFTs. It's basically you're not getting a file, you're getting a receipt, right? So, but also thinking about like fetishization, but also thinking about like financialization, which is something that, yeah, as Fabrizio was saying, like it's not new what we're talking about right here, but it kind of makes me think of also like Max Haven's writings and thinking in terms of like, drawing links between cryptocurrencies, encryption, but also free ports, or as he calls them, the palaces of encrypted culture. So it's kind of, these architectures of global financialized capitalism that encrypts the art within its walls and encrypt art as a kind of money. And it's something that kind of keeps makes me think that all of this that is being happening, because of course we're talking about like that, crypto art and artists working with blockchain, which is not new at all, which is true. But also on the other hand, we have all these kind of spectacle and sales and astronomical kind of numbers, etc., and money that have been actually, for me, taking a little bit the attention from what artists, the interesting things that they have been doing around blockchain. So this is the distracting part, and I think it's something that has always been happening with like with different art markets in a way, with the mainstream, and in terms of like all these kind of ways of kind of thinking about art as like money and spectacle, etc. And this is where, of course, it's not a surprise that this is happening with NFTs. It's like a new way to create these attractions, basically.
Yeah, if I can just say just a couple of things. I do agree with you, Irini, and I think that also we need some time to see what's going to happen, because the way I see is that this is clearly a bubble, and this kind of price, they are not sustainable at the long term. This is the way I think. I'm not saying that I'm right. I also want to correct a mistake that I did, and Anna Dimitriou pointed out that yes, people do talk about the environment impact in art fairs. That's true. I said that people don't talk about that. I should have said that, this also happens in the real art market. And I can sound a little bit nostalgic sometimes. I'm pretty aware of that, but I always think in terms of historical events and all of these things about computers and computer arts and all the problems involved about that. Always remember me the very classic article that Friedrich published in Page saying, should computer art should not exist, or something like that, when he said, well, computers are here in the world just to, take people's jobs and things like that. So, and then he took this long break of 15 years without working with art and computers, because he thought that both things were incompatible. So I think that it's always, the situation is to find a kind of balance, and and for me as an artist, the most important thing, it's always to find an aesthetical purpose for this technology, not just use the technologies by the sake of I'm minting NFTs now, and that's nice, and things like that.
I wonder if I could pick up on the two previous speakers' points, which is we do seem to have a lot of interest in the high end, 60 million pounds artwork, and there's clearly a lot of interest in what some of us might call the lower end of digital art, little collectible cats and images like that, which I'm more than happy for people to be interested in, but they're not necessarily what I might regard as computer art. Where do you think the potential might be for people perhaps in that middle section who aren't going to sell their NFTs for millions, but on the other hand, they're making art, and much of it good art, and they want to maybe generate a living? Do you think it's a short-term thing, or is it long-term implication for those sorts of artists?
I think there was a point Nick made, which is really important in this thing, is that it doesn't just benefit the societies which are doing quite well with art, who already have lots of ways to sell art and transfer money about and accept credit card payments and things. If you're in any country in the world, China's a special case because they're kind of really locked down, in India as well. But any other country, you can get hold of cryptocurrency one way or the other and be able to trade with anybody else in the rest of the world. And that is not happened before, ever. We've always had the problems of currency exchanges in governments and borders and all the rest of it. So any artist in the world who can access the internet, who can access some cryptocurrency, can engage with a global art market on the same basis as anyone from any other country. And I think that's just amazing. This is, so maybe, we don't find it so impactful, in our society, but it's the potential for other societies is amazing.
Maybe a question pops up is, how do you get noticed? That person it's a great facility for them, but how do they get noticed? How do other artists get noticed?
Well, that's an issue with how we present art on these sites, on these marketplaces, on Instagram. It's kind of, I think I can't remember who it was who, they were talking about the sort of the top level artists. We can't all be, number one. It's like, but you don't need to be number one, like you say, Sean. It's like you can earn a very nice living being an artist, and you don't need to be so famous that you're in all the blue chip galleries, and so you just need enough people. You just need enough of an ecosystem around you, and we're still finding out the best way to deal with that. I really don't like systems that sort of use artists and just let the ones that sell bubble to the top. I think we need better systems than that.
Okay, Sean, I would also like, if you allow me, to take this opportunity and the fact that Irini is with us and pick up just one question that is related to this subject. This question was asked by Vitor Pardinho, who was my student 10 years ago in Brazil. So his question is, what are your takes on the curation work on these platforms? I think that this is also, a central question. And this is one topic that I know that we mentioned and that we talked about, because again, I don't see myself in a position to say, CryptoPunks are not arts and things like that. But my personal taste is that most of the things that I see there, they are not what I consider art, and I think that there is a lack of curation on these platforms. But I don't know. I would like to hear what Irini has to say about that.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that there is much of curation. Of course, there are platforms that are curated, like, for example, Harm van der Dorpel. I don't know if I pronounce his name right. He has like this left gallery that he started quite a while. Actually, I think it was back quite early on. He started this gallery like this to enable artists to present art as well. And there are other, like Hiken Nunk is a good kind of example as well. But yeah, I mean, this is what I was kind of thinking about before, and it goes back to what Alex was saying in terms of like who is up there. For me, what is happening right now with NFTs is very similar to the traditional kind of, you know, like very traditional like gallery kind of market system. In a way, you have a very small number of artists that are kind of showcased, or like they get these massive sales, etc. And I wonder if this is also this is what I meant before, that I was wondering if this is also to do with the fact that NFTs are mainly based on Ethereum and like Bitcoin kind of blockchains, which is basically, you know, whoever is behind these platforms, like they do drive, you know, they want to drive interest and publicity, and of course they are going to work with the Beeples or the Banksys or whatever. But for me, it's like that doesn't mean that artists who are not at this level, like their work is not valuable, or that they're not. It's actually, for me, it's the opposite. Actually, it's a lot more interesting stuff. So it's something. It's an opportunity, I guess, for for artists, but also for like smaller like groups, for arts organizations to take initiative and just maybe you know, showcase work that we don't see. We just see like a very, you know, small mainstream amount of like artists out there. So yeah, we definitely need a curation around that. But again, it's I know, like Alex, you were saying before, that anyone, it is like an easy access thing in terms of like anyone can do that. But also on the other hand, it isn't as well, right? Because, you know, we still know that, you know, after so many years of like digital work and like there are so many arts institutions that, you know, they feel so alienated, and curators from these worlds in a way. So it's like, how do we create, you know, ways to, you know, just to introduce, and I'm not saying that it's not necessary to have all the artists to start making, you know, selling art with NFTs right now. It's not necessary.
Yeah, I think it's partly about separating the question of value from merely monetary value, and actually looking at the other types of value associated with this. And I'm just responding to Alex Buchan in the chat, who says eventually the NFT market will start to simmer down and we'll be seeing more conceptually led projects. And I think that's true. You know, there's a more sustainable aspect to this, that eventually the hype around some of the larger sort of sales and acquisitions will evaporate with the next big thing, but there'll be something left which will be actually quite useful and valuable to develop. And perhaps also Alex May's point about the nature of the connectivity and the democratization of these platforms. I mean, that was something that was evident even to some of the early computer artists back in the 60s, who thought that, you know, the digital medium would make that far more possible, even though at the time it was something that was, you know, a very rarefied pursuit. And, you know, it's taken 50 years, but eventually this technology is available so widely that it can actually serve as a medium that democratizes things, even if that view is in itself somewhat techno-utopian. But at least perhaps it's about, you know, somewhat flattening out the point of entry so that more people can get into it and work with it.
So I suppose that brings us on to really, what can the Computer Art Society do to identify the opportunities for artists, but also the opportunities for curators? If the Computer Art Society is anything, it's a collection of artists and curators and people with an interest in computer arts. And one thing we've been talking about is the potential for expanding our archives to include work that's distributed as NFT. So one thing we can do is have a CAS NFT collection, where the selection of work for that collection is done by some of the people here, a group of people. And the other might be to offer some education in the use of the platforms to help artists who want to engage with it to do just that. And I suppose it's a question that we want to put out there. Is this something that the audience here would be interested in? So that's both a curated collection and more work on helping people understand NFTs and engage with it. So we've got a yes there. So that might bring us on maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi. Hi. Yeah, I'm really interested in the whole area, and I have been for a while. I haven't done a lot in it yet, though. I've got a micro arts collection on OpenSea at the moment, which I'm kind of using it as a way of having an alternative location for putting all of the work from microarts, or at least images of it, up there, because you can post things up there without actually putting them for sale, without paying the gas fee to put it for sale. So it's kind of free to build up your collection there prior to any marketing or publicity that might happen around it. So I'm slowly putting, I've got about a dozen on now, just images saying, microarts, I should explain, wasn't just me as an artist, it was also a forum and a distribution channel. So we had a whole load of different releases, some not by me, mostly by me as it happened, but so I quite like the idea of putting things out into a marketplace rather than just being an artist. So I'm attracted to this area. I think, so I'm just building up this kind of virtual collection on OpenSea, just so it can be there and be seen. I haven't tried to sell anything yet, a bit like Sean in a way. I'm just building up, sort of testing the waters a bit. But I think it could be a way forward for Computer Art Society to get work into a different area as well, because the people who are interested in NFT art, if you can call it that, I mean, most of it seems to be, a lot of it anyway, seems to be short video clips, a bit like the things you might see on TikTok. Or, I mean, there's somebody called Zed who's a musician, and he works with very high-end CGI artists, and they produce really short, quite attractive small clips. And that's the sort of thing that you can watch on your phone very quickly and then, have an interest in it. So it works. I mean, Calvin Harris, the musician's also done some stuff. Kings of Leon, a lot of musicians are getting into it now because they see it as a publicity channel, and also they can make money out of it. So I think from computer art point of view, we're more on the art end of it than the sort of promotion or movie making, even mini movies that seem to be up there a lot. So I think there's a way forward where maybe there could even be a collection for the Computer Art Society that actually includes everybody that's in the Computer Art Society, almost in a way of collecting cards, so that you have the entire set of people that have been included, plus other people from outside, obviously. And they become an easy way for people that don't know nothing about what we do to just go and kind of browse through all the different things we have available. Because obviously on a phone or a laptop, you don't really see the art. You see a version of it. So I think the collection idea is a very good one.
Okay, I think thanks for the support. I think it's I think I'm also looking at the comments, and there's definitely a lot of interest in this. I think the challenge is twofold, really, which is one issue, but twofold. One is identifying work that's out there that is good, classic curatorial practice, work that is good, is interesting, connects with other work, and so on. And then maybe it's bringing artists in who could make a contribution and getting over some of these technical hurdles. You heard Jeff mentioned gas fees and things like this. These are some of these fees that pop up at various stages of minting a crypto that you or the purchaser have to pay. And I found, certainly with my experiments, I wasn't always 100% sure when a button would lead to a gas fee. Click a button, is it going to want to charge me for it? It doesn't take your money without you at least clicking another button. But occasionally I've clicked on things like I wanted to purchase Alex's piece, and he wanted to charge me £2,000. This wasn't money to go to Alex. This was money to go into the system. On the other end, when I did finally get around to minting something, I braced myself for £100 fee, and it cost me £20. And so there's clearly, I think, something to be done there in bringing people up to speed with the practicalities of minting or putting work online, and then work to do with collecting, informing curators and so on about the work that's being done and so on. And so one thought was that we might look at another session, a little bit more focused next time, about how Computer Art Society can look at engaging with NFT. And that might be the subject of a session in a couple of weeks' time if there was interest. Can I ask any of the panelists, Irini, as the curator here, is that something that you might find interesting?
Yeah, definitely. And what Jeff was saying before as well is really, I think definitely it's really interesting to think about that. Yeah, and I would love to help with that as well and to be involved. Okay,
and I think maybe in the spirit of all of this, we should try and keep it as open as possible. So if we do have this initiative, we will continue to do it in an open Zoom with YouTube available when the numbers are high. The other speakers, any comments? Fabrizio, I know you've got an initiative of your own, which I think is relevant to this.
Oh, yes. So, as many other people, I have been doing some experiments and doing some drops. It's very interesting. Something that I found very interesting is how just hardcore, let's say that crypto art community developed, because it's very hard for an outsider to get into the language and also to be kind of accepted in this community. So I have been trying to interact with just people on very channels, Discord and so forth and so on, and it's very, very hard. They have like a kind of subculture that they have been building around over the years. So the thing is, I told that because I used the term drop. That is the term that they use when they put something online. So I have been doing some drops, basically on OpenSea, and Vitor told something that is interesting, because I tried this year to get accepted in all of these websites. So I sent portfolios, I sent my CV. I have been doing that for more than 2 decades. I have artworks in the Victoria and Albert Museum collection. I have been also, like many others here, exhibiting around the world. And, nobody bothered to answer me. So that I start to put things on, to do drops on OpenSea. I have a collection. I drop things daily. It's called Prophecy AI Art. You can find that online. But the thing is, I also started to see the numbers of visits. I have been doing that for a while now, and basically I have got 1 or 2 visits. So it's really an OpenSea, and then when you put a drop, it's just a drop, because people will be very hard for people to find you there. So what as Sean mentioned, that I have been working with some colleagues, and this is also a kind of open initiative to build a new kind of marketplace. I don't like to call it marketplace, but well, just for the sake of simplicity, that will show just, this is my idea, artworks made by computer artists, and not, I know that it's very simplistic, but I will say that again for the sake of simplicity, not by like digital artists. So it means people that code their artwork. So I have been working on that. My idea is that it will be open as possible, and well, it's a project that if someone else would like to get involved, just drop me a line, no pun intended. So yeah, so it should be online very, very soon. And of course, I will also let you know. And also, I asked Irini about this creation process, because our idea is that the collection will be not only curated, but also peer reviewed. That it's also that Sean and we have been discussing. So I will let everybody know when it is available.
Great, thank you. So we're now, we're an hour and a half in, so a little bit longer than my planned duration, but maybe now is a good time to just sort of finish and think about the next steps. And so I'm pretty happy with the response in the chat and so on, to say that there's interest from Computer Art Society members and associates, and maybe new people who haven't engaged with us before, to continue to try and engage with this and to do something useful around educating artists and curating a collection. Of course, And the process of curation isn't about absolutely everything gets put into a pot and that becomes an exhibition. It's about really trying to mold and shape something that has an additional story to tell. I always find in curation, I like to uncover hidden stories or make connections that aren't necessarily obvious. So I think the process of putting a collection together will involve that sort of peer review and discussion and so on. But maybe it's something we could initiate with a discussion a bit like this, but maybe slightly more open to members in perhaps 2 weeks' time. So with the date now, it's the 13th of April. So it would be around about Tuesday, the 27th of April. And I could send an invitation out to all of the people who attended this session and those who want to get involved in this CAS project. I think it'd be an opportunity to learn more about NFTs, but also maybe contribute in different ways to an important project. Then come along, maybe we'll do a session in 2 weeks' time, maybe 2 weeks after that. There may be another opportunity for us, which is, as some of you will know, the annual EVA conference takes place in July. It's a conference that the Computer Art Society has been closely associated with for many years now. And there might be an opportunity there, even though it's an online conference, but it's still bringing together some interesting people to maybe launch a project if we felt we could produce something by July. So maybe that might be a bigger goal for us, to try to have our take on NFTs, Computer Art Society's take on NFTs, made public around about then.
Yeah, very good. I'm into that.
Yeah.
Good idea, John.
Thank you, Sean. Yes, well, we must have a second meeting to talk about this.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, I will send out that invitation. And thanks to all those who came along. Sorry if it was a little chaotic at the beginning. I literally had 20 people trying to talk to me at once. Very difficult. I hope that everyone got to join the stream. I'll find out when I send the email, and that you found it a useful use of your time. And thanks to all the panelists.
Thank you all very much. Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay, so expect
Bye-bye.
to meet up soon, and I look forward to seeing some of you again. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, see you next time.
Great. Thanks very much. Thanks, and bye.
Hi.
Ah, hello, goodbye.
Yeah.
Great. So I'm closing the session now, if that's okay with people.